Welcome to Resilient. Hosted by Matthew Mingy, Resilient is a podcast about hope, transformation, and the redeeming power of God's love. Born out of Matthew's experience in jail ministry, the podcast shares inspiring stories of people who've overcome addiction, incarceration, and despair through Christ. Each episode features authentic conversations, powerful lessons, and practical encouragement, all delivered with a warm and approachable tone. The goal is to remind listeners that no one is beyond God's reach and to offer hope for a life of healing, purpose, and resilience. Listeners are invited to join the journey, share the message, and embrace God's grace no matter where they are in life. Today we're diving into a conversation that holds a lot of meaning for me personally. I'm joined by my good friend Josh, who played a pivotal role in a major turning point in my life. I first met Josh during a men's Bible study when he brought up the subject of dashboard lights. At that time, it wasn't a topic I thought much about, but something about it stuck with me. So much so that I went home that evening and reached out to our pastor for Josh's phone number so we could talk more about it. This was about 3 years ago. That conversation was life-changing. It changed me, shaped me. It changed my perspective and ultimately helped me become more resilient. Today, Josh and I are unpacking that idea of dashboard lights, what they mean in our lives, how they warn us, and how they guide us toward healing and transformation. Stick around. This is going to be a powerful and practical discussion you don't want to miss. Okay, so to start out this episode, let's at least define a couple of things. Resilience is the ability to bounce back from adversity, and that definitely includes relational struggles. So just like the dashboard lights on a car warn us about issues, there are warning signs in a relationship that signal deeper problems. Ignoring these signs can lead to bigger damage, but addressing them builds resilience. I needed a lot of addressing of dashboard lights when I met you.
Don't we all?
And so in the last 3 years, we've got to do quite a bit of life together. So you brought up dashboard lights just really indirectly in a conversation, and that's changed a lot of things. Before we kind of get into hitting all of our points and our scripture points, do you have anything you want to say about dashboard lights?
Yeah, I think it's important, like you said, to define a couple things, and I'd like to kind of talk about where I got that from. So this idea of dashboard lights came from Dr. Henry Cloud, and he got it from somewhere else, I think. But the idea is, and I'm going to butcher some of the facts about this, but I'm going to get the whole idea, hopefully. So the idea behind not just dashboard lights, but more specifically behind resilience is several years ago, scientists tried to create a perfect tree. And when they were trying to create this perfect tree, they created a perfect environment for this tree to grow in. And as they were going through these experiments, they realized that these trees would grow to a certain height or a certain depth in their roots. And at some point, the trees were not able to stand up and they were falling over. And what they realized shortly after was that wind was necessary for trees to build up enough resistance for them to grow and to be strong and to stand up to the elements that the natural environment has. The point of me saying that is our emotions, which are our dashboard lights, and the way that we deal with relationships are not in a vacuum. So we have to develop the resilience or the resistance in our emotional, spiritual, relational, vocational, all these different elements in our lives. We have to develop that resilience. And since it's not in a vacuum, that happens in the elements. That happens in the world. That happens just naturally, just by being alive, unless you're sitting at home in the snow days for however many days we've been inside.
That's true. Snow day to day.
There's resilience in that too. But the point of that is for me to say the dashboard lights represent the things that are telling us there's an issue going on. Those are the things that we need to build resistance or resilience against. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. We have to evaluate them and just figure out how to do that. So that's where that came from. And I think when we first met at that Bible study, I was expressing a prayer request for my dashboard lights were going off like crazy. And I had not built up a lot of resilience at that point because I was crumbling and I was frustrated. And there's a dashboard light there, frustration. I was angry. I was tired. I was disgruntled. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew that my lights in my car, so to speak, were lighting up. And, we started talking ever since that day, and it's been really, really beneficial in my own life just to be able to unpack that with you, so to speak, because it was new for me too. And I just kind of had the first step ahead.
Yeah.
We both kind of started just figuring out what that looks like. And I think now we're kind of seeing the fruit of how to stand up against that kind of stuff.
I always like to bring up action points for anyone listening to this that may be the one step behind us, because I found you one step ahead of me, and that's all I needed. You were not Dr. Henry Cloud. You were just one step ahead. But an action point is find someone one step ahead and then go hit golf balls together.
Yeah.
Make golf balls or whatever that may be a therapy session. And then you can unpack a lot of these things in a non-judgmental way. And then you can begin to do life together and really grow. And that's really what we started doing 3 years ago. And now we're going to sit here on a snow day and talk about it again.
Love it. Yeah, it's great.
Okay, so you hit on dashboard lights, of course, dealing with relationships and how they symbolize warning signs like anger, avoidance, criticism, and lack of communication. So the common lights that I think we can talk about here for a moment that we need to watch for are things like frequent arguments or silence, resentment or bitterness, feeling disconnected or undervalued. Looking back at my past relationships, a lot of times these things will be apparent in your life, but you won't necessarily recognize them.
Yeah. You don't want to. You may know what they are, but you ain't going to let nobody near that.
Yeah. And so again, finding a person to talk to, counseling is great if you have the right person to talk to, but really getting into a good church and finding a group of guys that you can do life with that are not enabling poor behaviors, but trying to build you up and disciple you in the right way is life-changing.
We could go into that more maybe later, but I would like to kind of say, if anybody's listening to this, that counseling and therapy is great for dealing with your past. Finding a church with a good pastor that's a good shepherd that has good guys is great for dealing with the present. And then this new thing called life coaching is a great thing to look for to help you achieve your goals in the future. So you've got kind of 3 areas there that are specific to what we're talking about. So if you're really struggling with the past, if you've gone through childhood trauma, if you've gone through recent trauma, if you've gone through things that don't seem right, and you have a lot of lights going on, you may need to see a really good Christian therapist. If you really don't understand what's going on in your life right now, and you're struggling with daily life and really are just trying to figure out how to process the day-to-day, maybe getting involved in a men's Bible study or talking to your pastor one-on-one is the best way to go, kind of like how you and I got into this. And then the last thing is, if you're kind of firing on all cylinders, but still want to get the next step and get to the next process and reach the next goal, there's a whole lot of life coaches out there that do great work, which is something that you and I have both kind of dabbled with and talked about. So
I just recently read a part of Teddy Roosevelt's biography. When Teddy Roosevelt died, he died in bed. And when they found him, they found a self-help book under his pillow. So he died still trying to improve himself. That was a misconception that I had when I was younger, that, you know what, I know everything already. What could you have to offer to me? And so I was very closed-minded to everybody around me, that they can't help me because I know more than they know. So in the last 3 years, I've changed in the position of, I realize that I don't know it all, and I have to surrender everything to God to actually see Him working in my life. Some people are born and they're able to connect with God without having to make too much life change because they're grown up in just that way. But I had the arrogance that I needed to be broken down from.
You could just close your eyes and He's right there. But it's the changing of your values and your behaviors and the way you treat people and the way you go about your life that really to me is where the fun is, because it would not be very fun to hang around somebody that thinks they know everything when they're 20 years old and they've got it all figured out and they're going to do what they need to do, whatever they want to do.
Well, I don't go into the juvenile detention center too often, but when I do, I'm able to tell these young men in there that you guys think you know everything, but your brain's not even fully developed.
Right.
It's not fully developed till you're 25, and that's something I did not even realize at that time. So I made so many big choices prior to being 25.
Right. And obviously we'll get into it, but yeah, my addictions were, I thought I could do, before, when I was living in full-blown addiction, I thought I could do what I needed to do and was going to get where I needed to go and still get high and drunk every day.
Yeah.
I thought I had it all figured out.
And so we'll unpack that more in an interview model on this podcast here on a later date. Because that is a whole nother 3-hour conversation on its own. To hit back where we were just talking a moment ago and where our life change is. Prior to us starting this, I was reading in Luke 7, and it was the parable of the two debtors, and the summary of it is the key message is that those who are forgiven much love much, emphasizing the importance of recognizing our sinfulness in the depth of God's grace. If we need to be forgiven even more, just like the one that owed more in that parable there, you feel so much more grateful when it's forgiven.
Shame me or shut me down for this, but that's why I think addicts make the best Christians. we know, because people that have done what I've done and lied as much as I have lied know what darkness looks like.
Well, you say that as kind of joking, but if we looked at that and stayed on that longer, I think we all are addicted to something outside of Christ.
I'm going to probably say a lot of things that may be controversial. And the other thing that I'm going to say then is there's two types of people in this world: people that are active in their recovery and people that are not active in their recovery. And that doesn't mean that everybody is addicted to a substance or behavior. What recovery is an emphasis on spiritual maturity. Because at the root of all addiction, I would say, and I may be corrected on by some people, but I'm just going to speak freely here of myself, I was spiritually bankrupt. My heart had been completely cut off to God. And so the only way to true life and freedom from that is to let Jesus in.
To surrender.
Right? And that's how resilience is actually built. Right? Resilience isn't built by fighting. Resilience is if the tree tried to fight, going back to the thing at the beginning, if the tree fought the wind too hard, the tree would break.
Yep.
So the tree has to give and it has to tear. The fibers in the bark and in the actual trunk actually have to tear and be broken under the surrender of the wind. And that's how we have to deal, especially as addicts. There has to be a breaking point and a surrender to say, okay, if I push back any harder, something's going to go, and it's probably going to be me. So I have to surrender under God.
Well, almost being in jail 100 weeks now, one of the things that I continue to say to the guys is that I love not being in control anymore. And it's so much nicer when you wake up and realize that whatever happens today, I'm not in control. I'm going to do everything that God empowers me to do, but I am not in control.
Thank the Lord, because I tell you what, I made a mess
when I was in control.
Oh my goodness gracious!
So I also tell the young kids in JDC is find a woman smarter than you,
right?
And then let that relationship be rooted in Christ.
To your point, one of the biggest things about the 12-step process, but more specifically in Proverbs, a theme in Proverbs, and something that my sponsor Jeff has always emphasized with me, is being willing to accept instruction, and more specifically, being willing to apply biblical principles, because that's not natural. Now that there's the opposite of being powerless, is being the pushing back of like, okay, now I've got to actually like push against this thing that I don't want to do. And now I actually have to do it. And that's the thing that I think we're talking about at the core of this is my thinking is what got me into trouble. So I've got to realize that following my heart was the problem, right? If you follow your heart's going to lead you straight into all the things that destroy your life.
So you're not supposed to follow your heart?
You are not. Jeremiah 17:9. The heart is the most deceitful of all things. Who can know how wicked it is? And That's why Proverbs 4:23 doesn't say follow your heart. It says guard your heart.
Yep.
Right? We have to make sure that whatever is going in and out of our heart is what we want to be going in and out of our heart. And not even what we want, what should be going in and out of our heart.
So then what isn't a way to apply guarding your heart to your life to build resilience?
Well, I would say the first thing is, and this is not going to be difficult for most people. For some people, this is going to be more difficult. But I would definitely say identifying one either relationship or pattern that you know is not going well. Let's even say toxic. And then once you've identified that means what that means is you're allowing something into your heart, right? The Bible never refers to the heart as the organ. And I don't remember how many times it's a lot. The Bible refers to the heart a lot. And it's never once in the whole Bible referred to the organ of the heart. It's always referred to in a spiritual sense of the center of who we are. So if you have a toxic pattern or a toxic relationship in your life, that means you're allowing it. That means that your heart is open to that thing. So the point of the guarding is to say, I'm not going to allow that pattern or that person into that area. Now, don't hear me say that I want you to cut people off. But what I do want you to hear me say is I want you to cut behavior. Because it's so important to focus on, at least in my own life, it's been really important to focus on behaviors and not people. So just because I love someone doesn't mean I love what they do. I tell my kids that all the time. I love my daughters so much, and I can't stand some of the stuff they do sometimes.
Right.
And I think we just naturally grow up excluding, or because of incentives or because of the end goal of what we want, we make excuses and justifications for toxic things that we let in and out of our heart. So once you've identified that, let's think of an example. Let's say, just a real general example, your boss at work is sarcastic and condescending and uses profanity. Okay? Well, that's been going on for 7 years? You've been there, and every time it happens, you feel small, you feel uncomfortable, you have anxiety, there's a lot of things going, there's a lot of dashboard lights flashing.
Right.
And that happens. Well, one thing you can do is have a conversation with your boss. This actually that happened to me, where I had a conversation with my boss where, you get an evaluation every 4 months or whatever. And then at the end, they say, is there anything you want to say? We've done your evaluation. Now, is there anything as a manager you want to say to me? And I had a very, very calm, candid conversation when I said, I think I really enjoy being on this team. I think you're doing a great job as a manager. We're getting our projects done, blah, 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 blah. The only issue that I'm having with, and here's where the boundary comes in, here's where the protection of the heart comes in, is I said, I really feel uncomfortable whenever you use profanity in a business meeting. And that was it.
Right.
And that was half a boundary, because a boundary is only a boundary if there's a consequence. So I kind of given him an opportunity to respect the boundary. Now, if he would have, and he was really cool about it, but if he would have came back and said, well, that's the way I talk, and that's the way we're going to do things, and you can just deal with it, then I would have had some work to do on my end to actually keep that out. Now, luckily, he was, he said, oh, I understand. I didn't realize that was an issue, but yeah, I can definitely work on that. And he has done a great job of that. But point is, you have to identify it. You have to face it. That's really where the resilience comes in, is doing something different in an area that's been a pattern for a long time. So we have to be able to go there and say, no, I know what I'm letting into my heart, and I've got to put a stop to it. There's not a black and white, easy formula to that, but there is always an option to do that.
So guarding your heart is also like dashboard lights don't mean that there's a failure.
Right.
They mean that you need attention to something. So the importance of recognizing the signs before they escalate to something else, and also being able to apply a boundary to that.
I love Pastor Chad's analogy of already but not yet. So an already but not yet dashboard light could be in your car, could be an oil change light. Right?
Mm-hmm.
You need an oil change, and your car may not already be broken down, but if you don't address the oil change, your car will be broken down. So when we apply that to emotions or people, if you have anxiety attacks every time you have to go do a public speaking event or go in front of a group or just be going to the grocery store, that's an already but not yet dashboard light. Because if you continue to do that, you could have serious psychological and physical problems happen if those aren't addressed. So that's kind of a more practical example of what you're talking about.
What happens when we don't take the warning signs and we just choose to not realize? And I remember back when we started talking, you would tell me this proverb: whoever heeds instruction is on the path of life, but whoever rejects reproof leads others astray. So that's Proverbs 10:17. If we choose not to see that we have a problem ahead, that's not a wise decision.
So if you go to a mechanic and you tell them my brake lights are flashing, and your mechanic says, well, yeah, you've got, you need to replace your brakes on the front two wheels, and you tell the mechanic, nah, it's okay, I'm going to keep driving. And then you get into your car with your, family of four in the car and you keep driving. Well, you're now purposefully and negligently driving, knowing that danger is going to happen, that there's going to be a breakdown. And whether you can make the mechanic whoever you want, but the point is that we usually know where the issue is. And if we don't address it, the longer it goes on, the harder it is to fix. And like you said, sometimes the relationship or whatever's going on deteriorates altogether.
So we can build resilience through self-reflection. We can acknowledge our personal responsibility in this.
So I talk a lot about inventory. Self-inventory is a part of the 12 steps of recovery. It's steps 4 and steps 11 or 10 or 11, step 10. And what that is it's just basically what it sounds like. It's an inventory of my behavior. So I have to look at myself and say, how did I act today? What did I do? Who did I talk to? How did I talk to them? What did I say? Was I on time? Was I late? Did I tell them I was going to be on time? Right? There's a lot of things that we have to do. And when you're first doing this kind of stuff, it can be a pretty tedious process. And that's why it's twice in the 12 steps. Because step 4 is getting the past cleaned up. And then step 10 is more of a daily maintenance, right? It's checking every dashboard light every day and going, am I ignoring any lights here? Because here's the thing. We can have therapists and we can have pastors and we can have friends and we can have coaches and we can have groups and we can have all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's my choice if I allow those things to actually heal my heart and work on those things. I have to be the one to do that.
Can you make someone else make that decision?
No way. But what you can do is you can limit how they affect you. So I can't change anybody else, but what I can do is I can say no. But going back to the first example of what we were talking about earlier, I can't change them. I can't change my boss and make him talk a certain way. But what I can is limit how he shows up in my life.
So you can communicate, you can openly address the issue with the other person. And then you'll seek help, whether through mentors, counseling, prayer, but also a lot of people will want to leave it to prayer and not find someone else to do life with. Isolation is such a horrible thing, and it takes years off your life if you do not do life with people, if you do not do life with friends.
I think there's a book written about a guy who tried to prove that humans could live without any other people. And he went out into the wilderness and journaled his whole experience, where he was like, I'm just going to live by myself. I'm going to live off the land. I'm going to do what I need to do because his relationships are invaluable. And the guy ended up dying out in the wilderness, and they found his journal. And on the last page of his journal, I can't remember exactly what it said, but it said something like, this experiment was not worth it.
I failed. So honestly, I've told other people this, but that was my life before I had a relationship with Christ. I wanted to live alone on a large piece of land, and I didn't want anybody around me. And now I think if that was me today, how could I be able to make disciples of all nations?
Well, John 15:5, Jesus is the vine, we are the branches, plural. You can't have wine with one grape.
Yeah.
We got to be connected to each other and to Christ together in order for this whole thing to work.
All right. Preventative maintenance. What are the daily practices that keep relationships healthy? Expressing gratitude, spending time together, praying together. Before we started this conversation, I touched on a top 10 list, how my wife and I are being intentional together. And one of them is we're continuing to pray together, but we've prayed together every night since we started dating and into marriage. And I feel like that is that doesn't even have to be a dashboard light. That's just a sidebar of, if you pray together with your spouse, so many things can change. First off, you open up that vulnerability of being able to talk to God in front of your spouse. But then if my wife was here, I think she would say that she knows me better because she hears me talk to God.
There's a lot of data to back this up, and I might get fact checked on a lot of stuff on this. So sorry.
Well, I think there's only 3 people listening to this, so it's okay.
So I will give you some data on that. And I've been told that the way I say this doesn't come across right. So I'm going to say it 2 different ways. First way I'm going to say is the way that I learned it, which is 1 in 1,152 marriages that pray together daily get divorced. So another way to say that is less than 0.05% of marriages where the husband and wife pray together every day get divorced. If you remove that, it goes up to over 50%. So what you guys are doing, you talk about preventative maintenance, because it can probably get real easy to forget to do it or to not be intentional about it. And that intentionality of doing it, whether you feel like it or not, is preventative maintenance.
We both fell into the previous category, the 50% category in our past.
Exactly, because we didn't do that intentionally.
Yeah, I did not.
Yeah, and I heard a quote recently where it was in the context of a writer, somebody that writes books, but I applied it to a Christian, and it said, amateurs write when they feel like it. Professionals write whether they feel like it or not.
Yep.
And when we apply that same principle to prayer as a Christian, Christians pray. A real professional, I want to be a professional Christian. You can take that however you want, but I'm going to pray whether I feel like it or not. In fact, I'm going to especially pray when I don't feel like it, right? That's when I should be feeling like it.
Yep,
or
exactly.
When I should be doing it is when I don't feel it. That's where the resilience is built.
That's exactly right.
It's going, okay, God, I know that I need you more than ever right now because I'm going to fail. I want you to be powerful in my weakness.
That's putting him above everything else.
That's humility.
That's humility.
I just read a book on humility called The Hidden Peace, I think is what it's called, by Joel Muddamalle. And he makes humility such a simple thing to understand because I think a lot of people complicate it. And humility is simply understanding who God is. There's 3 pieces to it. The first piece is understanding who God is in the biblical understanding of who God is, his character. Understanding who God thinks of me accurately, that I'm a child of God, that I'm blessed, that I'm chosen, that I'm holy, that he has an inheritance for me. And understanding how he thinks of you. If I can understand those 3 pieces, I'm able to act humbly because I'm not overstating my abilities or my assumptions or my expectations. And I'm doing that within the boundaries and the confines of the way the Bible has already prescribed it, or maybe not prescribed it, but demonstrated.
That's good because when you realize that God thinks of you the same as the person that you may not want to think well of, then it changes your mind.
Especially with forgiveness.
Yes.
Repentance. And we talked about bitterness and resentment earlier, right? Resentment and bitterness is simply anger that's left to fester, right? So good preventative maintenance is do not let your anger go down while the sun is up. I don't remember the verse exactly, but the point of that verse isn't literally, at least the way I interpreted it, isn't literally you have to resolve this before the sun goes down. The point is if you don't address anger, it's going to turn into bitterness.
Right.
So the preventative maintenance piece of that is, okay, my anger dashboard light is flashing a lot, especially with this one person. I need to sit down first with myself and God and maybe a trusted person, figure out where that's coming from, and then sit down with them and have an honest conversation about that if that's possible. Sometimes it's not possible, but a lot of times it is.
One recent example for my wife and I of not letting that anger go unresolved before the sun goes down is sometimes I get tired at nighttime and I am not a very nice person. And the nice thing though, now I can acknowledge when I'm not going to be very nice. Yeah. And when I'm not going to be very nice, I know that a conversation's not going to go very well.
For you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'm going to make it worse.
Right.
And so telling my wife that, you know what, let's pray about this, let's go to bed, and let's schedule a time. As soon as we wake up, let's do breakfast, let's talk about this again, because that is going to put us in a better position.
We're going to get in a lot of trouble with people that think that verse means you can't go to sleep.
Yeah, we're just going to get in a lot of trouble in all of this. And again, luckily, I'm not in control of any of this. Overcoming these difficulties that we come across, the challenges, strength through challenges in our relationships, we want to be able to tie this back to our faith and how we submit to Christ, because that submission to Christ builds resilience. I never knew that as a kid, that I needed to turn my entire life over, and then I could build that resilience. And If you are the only one in a relationship that feels that way, it's going to be a lot more difficult. If this is a spouse, of course, you want to pick a spouse who loves Christ more than you. But if this is a boss, a coworker, it's a lot tougher to build that resilience or be able to overcome some of these things when they have a different value system than you.
Well, I think one of the tools that I've learned is being able to evaluate relationships and expect what they are capable of. I think a lot of times, at least I've done this a lot in my life, where I expect a relationship or a person, another person, to be something that they're not. Part of the work involved with resilience is I got to be resilient with myself to understand that maybe this relationship isn't there yet or isn't ever going to be there. And I need to manage my expectations. My dad's favorite line is misplaced expectations lead to big time disappointments. And so as I'm navigating life and as I'm working on actively, intentionally building resilience, I am evaluating my own heart and my own mind and my own emotions on am I even capable of the expectations that I have on this relationship? Or is the other person? And if you're not, then that's a great place to start our expectations really low.
That gets back to the humility and acknowledging who you actually are.
Who I actually am, with all my flaws.
With all your flaws.
And all my incorrect data that I'm going to get back.
All right, I feel like we've bounced around a lot here, but let's hit on some actual practical lights. So 3 types of dashboard lights in relationships: check engine light, the oil change reminder, and the brake light. The check engine light represents unresolved conflicts or hidden issues.
That's a whole podcast.
I think I know we could break this up and to have a whole series right here. I think I'm kind of glassing over a whole lot of this. And if we're smart enough, I'll be able to attach this document that I put together for this and put it in the podcast notes. Okay, oil change reminder. That indicates the neglect in nurturing the relationship. Example, lack of quality time. That is very big, I feel like, for men, lack of quality time, because we always have something more important. What do you say about figuring out what's important to someone? What do you look at to figure out what's important to somebody?
One of the things that I've really tried to work on over the past couple of years is asking really good questions and listening more than I talk. So I think the only way to find out what, besides watching them and seeing what their behavior is just ask them.
So also what I've learned from you in the past is to see what's important to someone is look at their calendar and look at their checkbook.
There you go.
And then you can see.
That can be an ouch or an amen.
That can be an ouch or amen, because you can take that, and maybe women do this too, but I only know it from my side. And so maybe you need to look at your calendar and your checkbook or your statement to see where you're spending most of your money and most of your time. And are you nurturing your relationships, or do you have that oil change reminder on like, hey, I need to plan a date night.
That light's dinging and I'm not doing anything about it.
In the future, I would love to have a date night weekly. Yep. Currently, I have a date night bi-weekly, which I am so lucky to have. And so to have that time to nurture that relationship, that's that preventative maintenance. 2 weeks is our 5,000-mile checkup to be able to get back together.
If that relationship isn't right, no other relationship is going to be right.
Correct. So I did not grow up this way. And I love that we get to choose our future is Bible studies together, but also Bible studies apart. I feel like you need to be able to have time together reading scripture, but also you need to have someone in your life to where they are not dependent on you to grow their relationship. I love that my wife has bigger Bible studies going on than I do.
Come on, dude, what are you doing?
But it's so nice to not have to do life. I guess what I'm trying to say is you want that foundation of Christ in your life so you don't have someone pulling you down. You want somebody to build you up.
Not to cut you off, but I remember a few years ago listening to another podcast, and they had a couple on that was recently married, and they were doing a Q&A with like a youth room. And one of the youth asked the guy, they said, what made you so attracted to your wife? And he said, well, the first thing was she didn't need me.
Yep.
She had her own relationship with Jesus. She had her own thing going on. She was already on her own path. And it was really attractive to pursue someone that doesn't need you and to have them choose you instead of the way our society looks at dating and relationships, where instead of I'm good and I would like to choose someone to be a part of this journey with Jesus, our culture has trained us to look for, well, I have all these buckets that are empty. How can that person fill these buckets?
Yep.
Right? That's why I look at that verse. Here we go. We're going to get roasted over this. That verse, the two become one. That verse does not say two halves become one. What that verse means is two whole people become one whole person.
I agree.
It's not your 50% makes my other 50%.
No kidding.
I'm going to keep living my life and do what Jesus wants me to do with or without you. I would like for you to be there with me.
Right.
But if you don't, that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm already good.
I remember you telling me that a couple years ago when I was dating my wife, and being able to look at her in that position of she has her own friend group.
Yep.
She's able to be a stable woman without me. I think I just want to be a part of that, and I don't want to go changing that.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so next was the brake light, and that warns when boundaries are crossed, requires caution and correction. And so that goes back to your Proverbs 4:23.
Yeah.
You're guarding your heart, but you have to acknowledge what's going on in your life. A lot of the times my dad used to tell me you can't see the forest through the trees.
That's right.
You don't want to acknowledge what's in front of you, but first and foremost, you must acknowledge what's going on in your life.
That's right. Another verse that goes with that, my anchor verse for my life is Proverbs 8:34. Blessed are those. So it's a promise with obedience tied to it. It says, blessed are those who listen, watch, and wait. And man, I can't tell you how many times I have so many examples. I could do a whole podcast just on examples of when I've listened, watched, and waited, that things turned out the way God wanted them to be, and continue to do that in my life. And what I see all three of those things as breaks, right?
Listen, watch, and
When
wait.
you listen, it means don't. What that verse doesn't say is, blessed are those who run their mouth, try to take control, do whatever they want to do, follow their heart, right? It says, stop, use your ears. Clearly there's a dashboard light flashing because you haven't caught something. So Josh, needs to stop and use my ears and my eyes and sit back. Because if I try to control this situation that I have no control over, or this person that I have no control over, I know exactly what's going to happen, and it's not going to be good. So, and here's the thing, God will let you do that, right? We have free will. We can try to take control if we want to.
I did.
Yeah.
It did not.
And it did not work.
It did not work.
So I hear this a lot from people, and it's something that I'm still learning, but I feel like because of the fruit in my life that I'm seeing in certain areas, that I'm kind of starting to grasp this idea of sitting back and letting God be God.
We read that book together, Anger, Taming a
Gary
Power.
Chapman.
Yep. Taming a Powerful Emotion by Dr. Gary Chapman. And I've taken this into jail. I've talked about it in the juvenile detention. And I feel like you and I came up with one word to sum up how to apply that book, and it was delay. Pause or delay. And you do, and that goes back to the Proverbs 8:34. Listen, watch, and wait. Do you want to have an application tip to take out of this podcast today? Listen, watch, and wait, which is also delay. Let God be God.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the people that I get to see in jail and juvenile detention, they did not listen, watch, or wait. Can you take your charges today and say that you listen, watch, and wait prior to doing something to get into here? And it's like, no, I did not delay. I chose to do what I wanted to do.
And that is essentially at the root, if you will, of resilience, because what you're doing is you're resisting yourself. And when you resist yourself, you become resilient to the world.
Right.
Because what are you going to do? I mean, are you going to go fight every person and control every situation? Command everybody to be at your beck and will? I mean, I think that's what people are doing nowadays.
Yep.
And we're seeing the poisonous fruit of that kind of behavior and that kind of life. What I can tell you is from my own life is I am so joyful and I'm so at peace. And I mean, I don't even know how to describe it, but one of the guys that I'm a sponsor of, he asked me the other day, he goes, you think it's normal for somebody to be as joyful as you are all the time? He was like mad.
Right.
He's like, you're always so upbeat, happy. And I'm not saying that that's a good thing, but what I am saying that right now, God is working in my life so much. And it's because I've really into the listening and the watching and waiting. Is The promise is I'm blessed when I do that. Now that doesn't mean financial blessing, but what it does mean is that I know, I don't feel like it. I don't have to see it. I know that I'm blessed already. It doesn't say you're gonna be blessed.
Right.
It says you are blessed when you listen, watch, and wait.
And that's the joy in chaos.
Oh man.
It's the joy of, and I tell the guys in jail this same thing, to have a scripture in your head as you walk up into court and sit down.
Right.
And you can be set free right there in that courthouse because you are extremely joyful in a terrible, chaotic situation.
Yep. God is gonna do what he's gonna do, and his sovereignty is obviously his sovereignty, which we don't know. The other side of that same coin is we have to be obedient, right? I can't make everybody happy.
Right.
And that's a lot of, we can go into a whole other thing about pumping the brakes. If I'm constantly concerned about other people approving me or being happy with me, that is not pumping the brakes. That is laying on the gas.
Yep.
And you're going to fly off a cliff.
That's enabling.
And codependency.
Codependency.
Yep. The only codependent I want to be with is Jesus.
Okay, so that often pride prevents us from admitting faults or seeking help. And so encourage humility to foster reconciliation. Moving on to accountability and partnership, relationships thrive when both parties hold each other accountable in love. Of course, that's iron sharpens iron. That doesn't just have to be a husband and a wife, but that's also friends. I was listening to a podcast last night about someone being successful at this stage in their life, and they've had friends for 30 years, and the friends thought that they needed something more from their friends' newfound wealth. And sometimes it's more you just need some people around you that can sharpen you, not, I guess, try to get more from you.
Well, I mean, one of the things that my daughters know that I've told them is that healthy friends want something for you and toxic friends want something from you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
You've told me that several times.
And man, there's some holes in that. Every phrase that I say has its limitations, but the point in that is that if you're guarding your heart, people aren't gonna want something from you, and they're not gonna be able to get it from you. You'll have to give it to them. And people that want something for you are only going to want you to have those boundaries in place.
That's right. I remember that maybe 3 years ago, you introducing boundaries to me and telling me that same thing. And so I think 3 years later, I've got a little more experience in it, but still, I think that's a lifetime application that you're learning in realizing that it's okay to do that. And if someone does not like the boundaries that you've put on something,
and they're the ones that need them.
They are the ones that need them.
Usually the people that get most upset about boundaries are the ones that are mad because you didn't have them in the first place.
Yep.
So going back to that, identifying a pattern of relationship, if you have a pattern where one person is getting a lot of stuff from you, and they have been for a long time, just use an example of, maybe a father-son. Maybe the father has been using the son for years, and then the son all of a sudden grows up and he's an adult and he puts a stop to that pattern. The dad's not going to be happy about that because his son hasn't had him his whole life, but it's good for the son. There's the for and the from thing.
No more child labor.
Or just, emotional. A lot of people just want to feel good, right? I know that's for me. I spent a lot of years just chasing after what made me feel good. And I think a lot of people do. And that's what pride gets us to do, is saying, well, I deserve happiness. Didn't you know that I deserve No, you don't. I don't deserve it. You know what I deserve? I don't want what I deserve.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why I'm so thankful for this whole Bible Jesus thing.
Well, that goes back to that Luke 7, the parable of the two debtors. The ones that realize how much they were doing wrong, they feel more love from God because they knew where they were headed.
Right.
Okay. So forgiveness as a foundation for resilience, the power of forgiveness and healing and moving forward. So in this resilience building topic on Dashboard Lights, are we forgiving somebody to help that person?
No. And forgiveness doesn't make anything better. Forgiveness is just a choice that we make. And it doesn't make anything different, to be honest. The only thing that forgiveness does, and I'll say this, and this has kind of piqued some people's interest before, the only thing that forgiveness changes is my heart posture towards Jesus. It doesn't change the other person. It doesn't change the circumstances. It doesn't change how I feel. But it starts the opportunity for those other things to change. All it is a decision.
That decision's probably going to bring down your blood pressure as well. I know we've talked about that person living rent-free in our head before, and once you forgive them, that's when they can finally get out of your head.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's definitely true, because if you haven't forgiven them, there's a lot of things going on if you haven't forgiven somebody. But what that means is you haven't released the thought of them. And a lot of this comes down to resilience and emotional maturity and dashboard lights. A lot of that comes to what you think about. One of my favorite guys that I listened to, Jim Kress, said, our words frame our reality. So if your words in your head, not just out of your mouth, but in your head, are unforgiveness towards someone, that's your reality, is living a life of unforgiveness. And we all know what Jesus said about that. So I don't want to be that guy.
In conclusion, I just want to kind of read through what the dashboard lights are, what the bullet points are, what is something that you can take out of here today, and how you can kind of apply this to your life. And so Josh is going to kind of chime in as he needs to. So part 1, understanding dashboard lights in relationships. So what are the dashboard lights? They symbolize anger, avoidance, criticism, or lack of communication. Lights to watch for are frequent arguments or silence, resentment or bitterness, feeling disconnected or undervalued. This does not have to be with just your spouse. It can be with a family member. It can be with a child. It could be with
kids are huge.
It could be with an in-law. But what I continue to hear about the children portion, more is caught than taught. And so if you're being an example of all of these behaviors in your other relationships, they can see that as well. Number 2 here is the purpose of warning signs. Why do we even care about these? Why did this stick out to me 3 years ago when I first met Josh? So just like a car, relationships need maintenance. Dashboard lights don't mean failure. They mean attention is needed. Yep. The importance of recognizing and addressing the signs before they escalate. So how can we respond to the lights? We can emphasize how early action can prevent more significant damage. That will allow us to self-reflect. We can acknowledge personal responsibility. We can communicate. That's kind of tough if you've got a poor relationship in your life, but you need to openly address the issue with the other person.
That's where the resistance. So I want to say something real quick about that. Addressing the dashboard light with another person is like the hardest thing.
Yes.
And I would not advise anybody to go out there and just start talking about dashboard lights with you. It's a complex and sensitive area of everybody's life, especially the people that are involved in this, that has to be done prayerfully, considerately, and with the input of other people, slowly and intentionally, to know that the steps that you're making and the way you're doing it is not out of blind obedience. It's out of consideration and wisdom.
Well, Proverbs says, where there is an abundance of counselors, there is victory and safety. So I remember back when we started talking about dashboard lights 3 years ago, I probably spoke with 20 different people to help me discern what the dashboard lights in my life were about.
You sure did. Talk to everybody. That's good.
So
most people don't want to talk to anybody, because that's the thing they don't want to talk about.
So we want to communicate, and we want to be able to openly address that with another person, but in the right time. We want to fully understand what we know about it and where we think we need to go with it. So it's wise to talk to a spiritual advisor, a mentor, a friend, a pastor, a counselor, a coach in this position to be able to put those steps forward. Because sometimes there's not safety in openly discussing the issue with another person. Sometimes it's perfect to discuss it with a neutral party.
Absolutely. Yeah. And especially if you haven't resolved that and forgiven that thing in your own head, it won't do any good to bring that up to the other person if you haven't already worked through that yourself.
So after communication, we need to seek help, whether that's through mentors or counseling or prayer, but
or all three.
Or all three. And it's almost like it doesn't need to be a short-term deal. It doesn't need to be a math test. You don't need to study this.
Right.
Make this a life practice. Make this your change in your life, in your new trajectory in your life. So we need to be able to build resilience in our relationships. And for that, we need preventative maintenance, daily practices to keep relationships healthy. We need to be able to express gratitude or spend the quality time. We need to be able to pray together. Spending the quality time is something that if you are not intentional about, it's not going to happen.
Ain't gonna happen.
It's not going to happen. Okay, then we're going to build strength through challenges. We're going to overcome difficulties, which will make our relationship stronger. If we can acknowledge these dashboard lights and use preventative maintenance, we can make our relationship stronger through acknowledging those lights.
And then you can actually bear fruit.
Yes.
Which is a whole other conversation.
Yep, then you can move forward.
Yep.
So I really feel that submitting to Christ builds the resilience in us both as individuals and in our relationships. So if we both think that we are head of the relationship, then you're going to get nowhere. If you both realize your position in the relationship, that you are, just like you talked about earlier, that you're yoked together to become one, and then we have something controlling us. And that is my relationship with Christ is controlling our relationship. And knowing that your spouse sees it the same way, everything can be beautiful. So to recap, dashboard lights aren't the problem. They are the invitation to address the problem and grow stronger. So pay attention to the signs, take the steps to repair, and lean on God's strength for resilience. Just to finish up, we'll have some additional practical tips. So how can we use these practical tips to build resilience through dashboard lights? We can have regular check-ins. We can encourage couples. Maybe it's a couple, you're one step ahead than another couple that you know in your life, and you can bring them in and kind of mentor them. You can be of encouragement to them. You can have check-ins with friends or family members and have conversations to address the small concerns that may become significant in the future. You can celebrate small wins. Acknowledge progress in relationships to build hope and motivation. You can pray for one another. Praying together invites God into the relationship and fosters unity.
And humility.
And humility. Therefore, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another, so that you may be healed. Amen. Oh, you know what? I did not hit record.
Seriously?
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Dashboard Lights. I want to take a moment to thank my co-host, Josh, for being a part of today's conversation. It's been such a blessing to sit down and talk with someone who's not only walked the road of recovery, but is now using his story to shine a light for others. Josh, my buddy, your insights and transparency have been inspiring, and I'm grateful for your heart to help others find freedom through Christ. If you or someone you care about is struggling with addiction and looking for a way out, I can't recommend Josh's addiction recovery group enough. It's called Free Indeed, and I'll post the info in the show notes below. This group is more than just a support group. It's a Christ-centered community where people come together, they share, grow, and experience real transformation. You don't have to face this battle alone. There's a team of people ready to walk alongside you every step of the way. As we wrap up, I want to remind you that no matter where you've been or how far you feel from where you want to be, Christ's love and grace are always within reach. Every story of recovery and redemption starts with a step of faith, and every step forward is victory we're celebrating. Thank you for being a part of this conversation today. Stay resilient, stay hopeful, and keep leaning into the light of Christ. Until next time, God bless.